thank you so much for being my guest today. We're here back with the Think Small podcast. My guest today is Patrick McDonald, owner or co-owner with CMG Parks. You own, many different, real estate properties, and we're going to talk about the mobile home parks that you own and how you got into business. I'm excited for this one because I have a soft spot in my heart for real estate. I really do love having conversations around how people build their sort of empires, right? And how they get that slice of that American dream. So welcome to the podcast. Thanks so much for being here.
Yeah. Thanks for having me, Alex. It's excited to be on and happy to share my story.
Yeah. So let's just jump right in. I mean, CMG Parks, did you always have a big background in real estate? I on our pre-call, you said no, right?
Not really. To the extent, my parents actually owned a couple apartment buildings when I was a young kid. And so Wednesday nights, my dad would actually take me down to like a 30-unit apartment in downtown Seattle and make me clean it, like basically the janitor. So I had, I couldn't vacuum for a long time because it just it gave me bad memories of every Wednesday night making me vacuum the entire place. But I did kind of see the power of owning real estate through my parents. And so that was something that kind of was ingrained in me at a young age. But I kind of lost it after I went to college and got a corporate job after college and kind of lost, that sense of cash flow, I guess, if you will.
That makes perfect sense to me. On my end, personally, a lot of my family, my grandfather came over from Cuba, and were it not for owning a multifamily, he wouldn't have been able to afford to like the full mortgage by himself, right? But then the next generation kind of took that to like that model, and we're like, oh, we can own multiple multifamilies, right? And then I remember being in high school and people being like, hey, like, what do you want to do when you're older? Like, what do you want to do for a job? And I'm like, I don't know what I want to do for a job, but I know I want to be a landlord. And that was like the big thing, right? So you had this corporate job, and then there was an opportunity. And why don't you talk to us about the first property and how you got into mobile parks?
Yeah. So, it kind of clicked again. I was working this corporate job. I kind of built up some cash, and I was like, hey, I should buy a rental property. And so I talked my best friend into buying a small duplex here in Seattle. And, we bought it. We ended up buying another one probably a year later. And, owning traditional multifamily to us was tough. Like, I remember we had a water break in one of the units and we had to remodel the whole unit. It was just kind of a headache. And so we kind of started looking for other ways to own real estate, but maybe not own the actual units. And funny enough, a good buddy of mine had mentioned trailer parks. And I thought he was crazy at the time, but we started looking into it a little bit more. And it was just kind of by chance that a small 13-unit mobile home park came up for sale locally where Nick, my business partner, and I had lived. It was probably 10 minutes from his house and probably 10 minutes from my house in between us. And we ended up buying that property. And that was kind of our first dive into mobile home parks. And, it was tough, even though it was small, it was dilapidated. We were on site. We were digging up sewer lines. We were helping remodel homes. We were kind of doing it all to kind of get it up and running. And so we learned a lot of kind of the boots on the ground. But we also spent a lot of time reading forums back then. This was 2016, 2017. So it was starting to kind of be a hot asset class, but there wasn't a lot of information on it. But we really enjoyed the model. And the model was you own the land, the residents own their home, and they're renting the land from you. And so you're really just taking care of the commonplace and any utility issues that come up underground, right? And so we really love that model. And so much so we ended up finding another mobile home park on Craigslist, of all places, out in Great Falls, Montana. And Nick, again, my business partner, just kind of happened to have a aunt that lived out in Montana in Great Falls. And so we ended up buying that. And that was kind of our first, I guess, dive into owning property from afar, if you will. So we kind of had to go out there. We had to hire a manager. We had to figure out how we could see the park without being there every day. Just all these kind of things that come along with owning a property from afar. But I think for us, it was really great that that was our second park because of the lot. Now if you kind of fast forward today, all of our parks, besides the one that we bought first, which we still own, are some level of driving or flying to. And so it really gave us exposure on how to manage real estate from afar, which was awesome.
That's fascinating. It's funny because personally, there's a big pull for me to go down to North Carolina. Like I've got some family friends that moved down there and they're like, oh, you got to move down there. And like the first thought in my mind is, oh, well, I'll have to sell my multi. Right. But you're giving me maybe some confidence that, you can still manage a property even if you're not on site. Right.
Yeah, for sure. Having good on-site help or vendors or whatever it may be definitely helps.
Yeah, absolutely. I was curious about, so it's 2016, you own 2 of these, properties, but is that enough cash flow for you to do this full time, or are you still working? And how does that juggling this sort of emerging business and then also your full-time job? What's that like?
Yeah, no, both Nick and I are still working corporate jobs. Both of us started a family in 2016. So of course our wives were like, there's no way you're quitting your corporate job and trying to do real estate, which at that point really wasn't something that we were thinking about. It was kind of just a nice side hustle with cash flow coming in. So it wasn't even on our minds that we were going to quit our job. We did eventually quit our job. So, after we bought that second park, we ended up selling that park about 6 months later. We made a decent chunk of change. Then we ended up buying 3 more parks with that profit. And kind of fast forward to 2020, those kind of 4 or 5 parks were starting to cash flow pretty well, to a point where we did have the conversations with the wives. We're like, I think we're onto something here. I think if we continue down this path of owning mobile home parks, we can do this full time. And luckily, both of our wives were crazy enough to let us do it. And so we both quit our corporate jobs in 2020. And that's when we really accelerated. So we had 4 or 5 parks in 2020, and today we have 30. So it really was kind of our launching pad, and allowed us, those 4 or 5 parks that we bought with our own capital were cash flowing well enough to kind of quit our corporate jobs.
Awesome. And do you mind if I ask what month in 2020?
Yeah, it was COVID was like hitting. It was March.
Okay, because I'm wondering, 2020 is an interesting place for you to sort of pause in this story, right? Because in my mind, I think of 2020 and I think of the COVID, pandemic as an opportunity for the RV lifestyle. Mobile homes, I know that, they were on social media, and I personally, like my family, we spend a lot of time glamping, right? My parents owned a nice trailer, so we spent a lot of time outdoors. But I know that when 2020 hit, people were like, I'm going to quit my job, or I'm going to sell my house. I'm going to live in an RV full time and travel around the country. And it was an interesting time. I think there were a lot of people doing that. Did you find that occupancy kind of upticked after the pandemic hit, or did you find some growing pains there?
Yeah, I mean, at that point in time, I think we had, of the five properties we own, 2 of them were extended stay RV parks. I do think that occupancy went up, right? You had kind of exactly what you said. People were like, I'm leaving town. I can work from anywhere. I'll work, in my RV in, Eastern Washington or whatever. So I definitely think that there was some, uptick in occupancy for us. It was an interesting time too for us. Both Nick and I were kind of in the healthcare field. So I was the physician recruiter and he was a dental supply regional manager. So when COVID hit, it was like, we're in healthcare. Like, what does that do to do they stop recruiting for doctors? Because that's what I was doing. And Nick actually got furloughed because there's like no more travel into dental offices to sell dental supplies, right? Like everything stopped in the healthcare field. So it was a little bit of a blessing and a curse to quit right around then, but it worked out. Yeah,
it's nice that you almost like it all just kind of hit right in the perfect timing, right? Like you had already kind of had this nut that was growing and this real estate business that was churning, and you were like, hey, like maybe we should quit our jobs. And then who knew it was going to be a pandemic? You're going to have sort of nothing but time on your hands. So then how did you end up, what did you do in 2020? Was there more acquisition at that point? Because I think there was a lot of people selling property at that point, right? I mean, the markets were still pretty good.
Yeah. So both Nick and I, even though we're in the healthcare field, they were sales-based jobs. And so our competitive advantage has always been finding deals. And so we just went on a rampage. Once we quit our job, it was like, okay, we can cold call 10 hours a day, find deals, right? And that's kind of what we did. I think in 2020, we ended up buying seven more mobile home parks. And so we were just, at the same time, we were obviously hiring and building kind of our property management side of things. Early on, Nick and I realized that we didn't, after we did the first park, we didn't really want to be the boots on the ground for life, right? We wanted to kind of hire out and build that side of the business. And so, we just went full bore into like finding deals, hiring people, kind of making the business into CMG, which what it is today, which is a fully integrated property management company. So,
yeah, it's fantastic. Sort of talking about the structure of the business. So you have CMG that's managing this. Where are you at now today? Was the company any larger than it is today? I think you talked about you've kind of sold some properties off and then grown. And where are you at today?
Sold some properties over the years, mostly to upscale and get bigger deals or better deals. Today, our corporate office is in Seattle, so there's probably 9 of us here in the corporate office. We utilize offshore virtual assistants quite a bit. So we probably have 7 of those folks kind of doing random stuff. And then we have probably 30 to 35 on-site employees. Those are people that are taking care of the parks on a day-to-day basis, right? Property managers on site, maintenance guys on site, landscapers on site. And so we have CMG, which again is kind of our property management. We have Cascade Homes, which is our broker dealer. So we do a lot of, in mobile home parks, we do a lot of infill of mobile homes into our communities. So we're buying new homes, bring them into the communities and then selling those. So Cascade Homes manages that entire thing. And then we have Community Capital, which is kind of our real estate investment arm of the business, where once we find a deal, we're going out and raising capital through normal syndications like friends and family, or private equity, or joint ventures, whatever it may be. So,
yeah, I was kind of curious about the financing of it as well. Just from what I know about kind of scaling real estate businesses, is that almost like those first 2 or 3 are more challenging than the 9th one, right? Because once you're at 5 or 6 or 7, you can kind of leverage those equity in the other properties without necessarily putting up a lot of collateral. Is that the case with what you've been doing, or what are some of the strategies that you've used for creative funding?
Yeah, I mean, early on it was we were creating a lot of value in our early parks, and then when interest rates were low, it was very easy to increase the NOI and then refinance either your initial investment out or your initial investment plus some out, right? And then you could go buy the next park. So we did a lot of that early on. Early on, we also did a ton of owner financing deals. So like I said, both Nick and I were sales guys. So we were selling some of these property owners on seller financing, which is a really great option for some folks. And so we still have probably 7 or 8 owner financing deals. And we still always give that option when we're making offers on real estate. So we'll give them kind of the quote unquote cash out offer, and then we'll give them a seller financing offer as well. But yeah, obviously it gets easier. When you have more properties, you can pull equity out of properties to buy other properties. It also gives you a great track record, right? I talked about syndications. We do a lot of investor syndications. So, the first one is kind of like pulling teeth to get people to invest with you, right? Because they're like, you have no track record. You don't know what you're doing type thing. And we thank our early investors every day just because it was, a leap of faith for them. But now that we have 30, we've had full cycle deals where they've seen, capital invested and capital return. And so it definitely makes it a lot easier to go out and raise capital. In fact, a lot of times it's not even us necessarily going out and advertising. It's people coming to us and say, hey, I got some money. Can we go do this deal? And so it's just made our life quite a bit easier.
Hmm. Are those seller financing opportunities still out there? I've been kind of turned on to them, and there you have to really kind of sift through the weeds a bit to find something, right? Are you still coming across good opportunities, even though sort of the real estate market has kind of ballooned a little bit, right? I think pricing is up, inventory is fairly low. I think people are holding on to properties a little tighter.
Yeah. Yeah, we still we just did a seller financing deal not too long ago. So they're definitely still out there. There's a whole kind of approach to getting owners on board with seller financing. It obviously helps that we've had 8 or 9 seller financing deals in the past, because we can kind of leverage the people that are still carrying those note as reference, like, hey, they always pay on time. They've been great to work with, right? That's definitely something. I would say seller financing is never off the table. So I mentioned we offer kind of a cash out price, and then we offer a seller financing price. Even if they take the cash out price, we're always kind of still working them to a seller financing deal. So even though we're under contract with them at a cash out, we're still dripping on them seller financing, right? Because again, unless they need the money to go buy or 1031 into something else, it's a really great way to defer capital gains, have extra income through interest, right? That we're now paying them the interest, not the bank. And a lot of times they can get their ideal sale price with seller financing versus the cash out, right? Interest rates have made property values go down versus seller financing. Maybe they're doing it at 3-4%, and now their property values are kind of back what they were 2 years ago, right? So,
yeah, really interesting. It just I always constantly think about the different strategies that people are using in order to leverage their equity and the portfolio that they've kind of accumulated. I'm curious about some of the immediate obstacles, or some of the things that were like curveballs to you when you got into this space, right? What were some of the things that you weren't expecting that maybe came out of nowhere, out of left field? Like when you buy a residential property, you talk about a water line, you talk about water heaters, or the heat goes out, you got to replace a boiler pretty quickly, right? Was there anything from the mobile park perspective that you didn't expect to be an expense, but now you're like, when you buy a new property, you're like, we got to make sure that we check this because that was a problem, 5 years ago?
yeah, I mean, one of the things that comes to mind early on were, even though the tenants own their own home, when you're dealing with a lower end mobile home park or trailer park, a lot of times tenants just leave their home, right? And so you end up with these 1970s, maybe early 1980s mobile homes, which are very dated, have a lot of issues. And so when you end up with these homes, you got to kind of figure out what you want to do, right? Do we remodel these? Do we just sell as is? Do we pull it out and put a new home in there? And we didn't know all the options when we were young, right? Doing this, we were just like, I guess we got to remodel this. And we end up spending, 25, 30 grand on a 1970s home and then sell it for 10, So there were definitely some learning curves on the mobile home side, like the actual kind of mobile homes. That was probably our biggest curveball. After the first property, we kind of knew about sewer lines and water lines and all that stuff. But we've learned a lot about like septic systems. We didn't know anything about septic systems before we owned mobile home parks, and now we're like masters at them. So, I would say mobile homes were probably the number one curveball.
Yeah, that I could imagine, right? Like they're not necessarily the most secure investment, right? I follow Dave Ramsey, and he says about a trailer. He goes, if you don't feel like you can take $20,000 and put it in the middle of the room and light it on fire, then you probably shouldn't get a trailer. And but people treat recreation differently, right? Than Dave Ramsey would consider it. But anyway, all right, very cool. The septic systems are actually very interesting to me as well. I've camped in a lot of different ones, and I'm always impressed how many different. Like you walk around, you're like, there's one there, there's one there, there's like 9 on a property. You're like, oh wow, this is a pretty large operation. What else was I thinking about? I was just thinking about something. About tenants, right? Interacting with tenants, and like, are these on like regular, like 1 year leases? Are you month-to-month leases with them? And then the other question that popped into my head was around like potentially offering like ownership. Have you ever explored that model where you're like offering them like a slice of the pie kind of thing? I don't know if that's what's that?
Are you meaning like if when you buy the property, offer the seller some upside equity?
No, more like the tenant, right? Like if you're like, all right, like, having them buy their spot.
Yeah. Well, I'll go to your first question. So most states, you're probably familiar with landlord-tenant law, right? Every state has landlord-tenant law. Most states also have mobile home lot law or RV park law. California has all three. They have landlord law, they have mobile home park law, and they have RV park law. And so it's very similar to landlord law in that you typically have a year lease. Some states are better than others. Washington is a particularly tough state because it automatically renews for a year. There's really no non-renewal of mobile homes. But every state does have particular rules, but most of the time they're on a year lease. RVs, our extended stay RV parks, are a little bit different. They're typically on month to month because most people want to be month to month. They're traveling nurses, they're traveling contractors, things like that, right? And so I think just dealing with the tenants is probably very similar to normal landlord-tenant law with a couple minor tweaks because it's a different mobile home lot law. Anyways, so that hopefully answers your first question.
Yeah, it does, absolutely.
The second question is interesting. There are some business models where they do kind of parcel off the mobile homes. And so we've come across parks where it's like half the park is like a traditional mobile home park, and then half the park is like these small parcels where they sold a parcel off to the mobile home owner, right? And that created some ownership. That's probably not a model for us. There is, you're seeing a lot more kind of like HOA models where the tenants are actually buying the parks, right? So they're creating kind of an HOA. They're going out and getting funding, whether it's through loans or grants, and then buying the park from the owners. Excuse me. So we're seeing a lot of that on the West Coast. TBD on how that plays out. You're talking about 100 residents owning a property together, and you can imagine the fighting and HOA meetings.
Does it make it difficult to purchase those properties? Like, is it when you see that, are you heading for the hills on those because like you're not? Are you going to individually negotiate with that tiny little lot owner, right? Are you looking for more concrete whole properties that have been kept whole?
Yeah, we probably wouldn't approach a park that had a mix of like single parcel ownership and larger parcel ownership. Probably wouldn't be a good fit for us. Yeah.
The one question that kind of popped into my head was around are you exclusively extended stay, or do you offer week trips, that sort of thing?
For our RV parks that are extended stay, we don't do any weekend or like weekly rates, mostly because extended stay works very similar to like a mobile home park. And so we have kind of less staff there to like monitor people coming in and out on a daily or weekly basis. We do have an RV resort out in Montana that's more traditional, kind of glamping and nightly and weekly stays. That being said, they also in the wintertime there, Montana slowed down, so we do offer extended stay monthlies out there. And that's kind of the only time that there's a mix of extended stay and daily stays in one of our communities.
Cool. I always like to end these on like a high note, on something optimistic, that you have something coming down the pike in the next, let's say 6 to 12 months or something in the next 24 months, potentially. Just because there's a lot of, that you read the news and it's all bad. So I like to be positive, right? So what's something that you're excited for maybe in the next 12 months?
Yeah, manufactured housing communities are popular and picking up steam and a great affordable housing option, I think, in the United States. And so there's a lot of legislation at the national level that's improving mobile homes, making them cheaper, having less regulation to kind of get more homes in communities, new homes, and they're beautiful homes too. They're real stick built homes, so they're a great option. And I think there's a lot of good stuff coming from HUD that's going to allow, I think, mobile home parks to prosper in the coming years. And so we're super excited about that. There's also a lot of lending options for residents in communities now. You know, back in 2016, it was very tough to have to get a loan on a mobile home. And now you can get pretty traditional lending on mobile homes, which makes it easier for the residents to buy their homes. It also makes it easier for community owners to bring in homes and sell them. And so it's just a win-win all around. So I'm super excited for kind of what's coming down the pipeline nationally for regulation for mobile homes. And I think we're going to see a lot more of them popping up over the next 10 to 20 years.
Fantastic. So if somebody, I know it's a niche market, but if somebody was sitting on a mobile home property and they were looking to sell, or if you had somebody that's listening to the podcast that is, capital investor, private equity investor, and wants to, get involved with you, how would they reach out to you? How would they get in touch?
Yeah. So if you go to cmgparks.com, it's a great place to see all of our communities. You can sign up to be on our investor portal, and you can reach out to us if you're thinking about selling your community. And then we're always happy to chop it up and talk mobile home parks and RV parks. That's kind of what we live and breathe. And if people just want to reach out and have a conversation, just find us there.
Fantastic. All right, Patrick, thank you so much for your time today. Really enjoyed this conversation. I always leave a conversation talking about real estate, like feeling just like all jazzed up and ready to like go buy something, go buy a property. Like I love it.
For sure.
So thank you for your time.
Yeah, thanks, Alex. Appreciate it.
All right. Take care.